What's up guys, welcome to a new video about how people use cognitive biases when they try to convince one and another. So just the other day I was talking with a friend about climate change. His point of view was that we could wait a little bit longer before we should take any action, but my opinion was that we should take action right now because the situation requires it. So after going back and forth at each other with arguments, I started to see a pattern in his reasoning. For example, he told me that the whole world, well, actually the majority of people was supporting his claim, his opinion. But I was wondering, how? How do you know that for sure? And the point was, these people actually don't know what they are saying. They aren't aware of the claims that they are making. They fall into the trap of cognitive biases. So the question of today is, what are the most common cognitive pitfalls to avoid when you try to convince someone? So what is a cognitive bias? A cognitive bias makes you irrational and you start being illogical. It creates your own subjective reality. So I've picked 5 cognitive biases that are frequently used when people try to convince someone. I've picked these cognitive biases based on my own experiences and the experience of other people. The first bias I'm going to discuss is the false consensus effect. This is a cognitive bias where people overestimate the extent to which their beliefs and opinions are shared by others. So the example I used in the beginning of the video with my friend who was claiming that the majority of people supported his opinion is a perfect example of the false consensus effect. He incorrectly assumes that people think the same way as him, and that's what he's using to strengthen his opinion in order to convince me. So be aware of what people are claiming and how legitimate it is what they are claiming. So the second cognitive bias I'm going to discuss is the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is a cognitive bias where recent events that have happened in our lives determine the importance of it. So let's say, for example, that you're talking with your friends about how safe your city is. However, last week your wallet was stolen when you went out with your friends. So you determine your opinion based on that information, on that your wallet was stolen. So you want more police on the streets. You think that the crime rates are rising only because of the fact that your wallet was stolen last week. And that's what the availability heuristic does. So be aware of the source on which you base your opinion. The third cognitive bias that we're going to discuss is the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to interpret, favor and recall information in such a way that it will confirm your pre-existing beliefs. So, for example, let's say you're comparing with your friend Ronaldo to Messi. Your friend is a pro-Messi fan and you are a pro-Ronaldo fan. Your friend is telling you that Messi is the best player in the world just because he was the best player in the world in 2015. However, what he doesn't take into account is that Ronaldo was a lot of times injured and suspended during that season. So he's only looking at the facts through his own perspective. So if you have a discussion with someone, try to keep an open mind and not just only recall information that will confirm your pre-existing beliefs. So the fourth cognitive bias I'm going to discuss is the base rate fallacy. So the base rate fallacy occurs when a person misjudges the likelihood of an event just because he or she doesn't take into account other relevant base rate information. So for example, you're talking with your friend whether traveling by plane is still safe. So your friend is telling you that traveling by plane isn't safe because last year there were many plane crashes. However, you're telling your friend that it is still safe because the majority of the planes that flew landed safely at their destination. So what's happening right here is that your friend is neglecting base rate information. She's ignoring or neglecting the fact that the majority of the planes landed safely at their destination. So she's jumping to conclusions based on specific events rather than taking a look or having the big picture in her mind or his mind. So be aware of how you jump to conclusions and how you form your opinions. So the last bias I'm going to talk about is the bias blind spot. This bias makes you view other people as more biased than you are. So you see more flaws in their reasoning, you see them as more subjective than you are, and you also see them as more prejudiced than you are. However, the blinded part in this bias means that you are unable to recognize that you are as equally as biased as the other person. So you also have flaws in your reasoning, and you're also prejudiced. So next time when you're having a discussion with someone, please keep this in mind, that you are as equally as biased as the other person. So don't immediately point out their shortcomings in their reasoning and in their arguments, because trust me, your reasoning, your arguments are also flawed. So the reason why I've told you about these cognitive biases is because I feel like the communication between people can be improved. Often people want the same, but they express it differently. Another reason why I've told you to be aware of these biases is to help you convince other people by knowing what you shouldn't say when you try to make a point. I mean, like, who doesn't want to win an argument, right? I know I do. I really love it. I love to see my friends' faces when I win another argument and they are all getting really mad because they aren't on my level, you know?
Fatality.
So anyway, keep it rational, keep it logical, and don't fall into the trap of making irrational assumptions when you try to make a stronger point, because as you now know, you won't. I'd like to conclude this video with a quote by the great philosopher Confucius. Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance.